You were in my life, but it was late, far too late to reverse the clock.
Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Toronto-based jazz singer Peter Campbell. We caught up with him in early April 2020 to talk about the world lockdown due to the coronavirus and his new 2020 CD, Old Flames Never Die. He talked about his beginnings, his career, and the hope for the future. Enjoy.
So, how you holding up?
We're okay. At least the Arctic temperatures have subsided.
Now, you're in
which
Toronto,
is always a benefit. I'm in Toronto.
Okay, yeah.
So, it's a little cold up here a lot of the time. So.
Yeah. Well, we just started out here in Kansas City getting out of our winter phase, and which lasted for a while, and it's starting to get a little bit warm, which is good.
Yeah.
So,
And, and there's been we've had a national response, and because of the population difference, we're not getting quite the numbers.
Yeah.
So,
I guess the real rub down here now is, we've been on this quarantine for what seems like just an enormous amount of time, but I think it's been enough time that we've been in the middle of this that our numbers still, which is maddening to me, they still say it's going to spike, and then we'll start seeing a curve dip down, but they aren't saying the numbers are going to start spiking for a little while longer, which to me is just, this whole thing's unreal to me. I mean, it's so long, it's crazy, and it's just a big waiting game, and, I just saw reports that, unemployment again has hit some record high, and it's just, there's just no end in sight. No one's given us any clear indication. I mean, there's some indicators of when things may open back up, but it's just,
I don't think anybody really knows. That's the thing.
No.
This is something that we're so not used to in our lifetimes, that they're kind of learning as they go along.
Yeah, totally.
And we're so used to having clear information. You go from A to B, and I think with this, it's kind of, we're all sort of figuring it out as we go along.
Yeah, right. And we are. That's the thing. Right. It's like there's just no answer.
Yeah.
So, but the one thing I've been wanting.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, you're good.
No, I was just going to say, so, any number of not just musicians, but certainly musicians, their lifeline is gone. I mean, it's every aspect, and for how long it goes on is debatable, So.
That's the thing about this that's wild, is that, when I look at, what I do with this and the musicians, it's like there's some musicians out there that have safety nets, have spouses or they work at universities and they have safety nets, but there's a lot of people that don't. And if there was some kind of clear idea of when this could possibly pick back up, that might give people a little bit of a better way to relegate this. But like even with us here in America, they passed this bill, but none of the monies are going to get to anybody until perhaps when this quarantine is over. And, it could be May, and then it's over, and then it's after everything's happened. Well,
and just the sort of the domino effect of the restaurants that won't be able to reopen, won't have the venues to support the musicians, who then have no money to go in to record. So the recording studios are belly up. So then it just keeps going and going and going. And it, that's the how everything is connected. And so it feels kind of odd, like dropping a record in the middle of a global pandemic. But what are you going to do? You've planned these things for 5 and 6 months, so you can't really, go back. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, I had someone reach out to me that I interviewed just before like the middle of March, and they were like, thanks again for the interview, and doesn't it seem like a million years ago that we interviewed? Because at that time, just around mid-March and before that, everybody I talked to, there was a million gigs. Spring was around. Spring always picks up. Once the warm weather comes, everybody's in like motion and tours and everything. And it's like, that's one of the functions of what I'm doing right now with the interviews, is that everybody's got time and everybody's got, very little going on. So it's probably a good time to talk about the music.
Right. And hopefully radio can kind of help to, I suppose, sort of fill a void with new work, and which is not to denigrate the work of the great masters, but Ella Fitzgerald doesn't need the publicity. You know what I mean?
Right. Yep. That's right. Right.
And I mean, with the models and the way that music is now, I mean, and I'm not 25, so I remember a day when things were different, and so you might as well just pull a U2 and just give everyone the album downloaded to their phone. I mean, essentially,
right?
It's kind of it's. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying it's sort of, what do you do? It kind of is the way it is. So.
Yep, absolutely. Well, hey, thanks for taking a minute out. Let me start everything off here with talking about your newest CD, Old Flames Never Die. Talk to me a little bit about kind of your vision for this project.
With anything that I do, it always starts with the material. I mean, it's all about the song. It begins and ends with that. If that isn't there, then nothing's going to work. And so it usually starts with a few tunes that are in my wheelhouse that I have to record, and then I'm a little old school in that with a recording, I strive for something that has a kind of a point of view, either thematically or a narrative, or it's a dedication to a particular artist or a particular songwriter. Even though I realize that music is not listened to that way as much anymore, but these kinds of records are often recorded quite quickly. So I began to look at the material that I wanted to work with, and I was getting a kind of idea of a kind of a torchy record, sort of inspired by 1950s concept records, but not so literally. And then thematically, a lot of night imagery, moon, stars, dark night was coming through. And I didn't want to sort of beat that over anybody's head, like doing a song or doing an album where every song had, wet or moon in the title, but to kind of take you on a little bit of a journey. And bring in a little more elements of folk and pop, but keeping it sort of cohesive. That's kind of the very long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah. So, were you born and raised in Toronto?
I was not. I actually was born and raised in New York City.
Okay.
And to a Canadian mother and an American father. So I've been coming to Canada my entire life and was educated here, but was, lived in New York for many, many years. But for family reasons, I moved up here. And so that's what brought me to Toronto. But I'm very much a New Yorker, so.
Well, talk to me about your childhood and how you got involved with jazz.
Well, I come from a family of classical musicians, actually. My grandfather worked for CBS for most of his career. He was a Juilliard graduate and played the violin. He was a conductor, a composer. And he played in the pit orchestra of the Ed Sullivan Show, actually. So would drive down to the Ed Sullivan Theater for the 5 o'clock Sunday taping. My grandmother was a recitalist. My father's a trained clarinetist. My aunt taught at Juilliard for 30 years, so I come by it pretty honestly. And kind of grew up in the business and was performing as a young child with other sort of Broadway theater kids, and was classically trained, and was probably more geared towards musical theater at a certain point, but I'm not really an actor. So, and in my early 20s kind of discovered more of the standards and that kind of material, which I felt was better suited to my voice. And, but I've been literally singing since I was 11 years old. So, so that's how I sort of came to it. And, Shirley Horn was a very early influence, on me. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I actually released a recording in tribute to her work. So,
right on.
Yeah,
so
so
was it always music for you? Was that always the dream?
You know, I would say so. I mean, in my late 20s and early 30s, I took a little bit of a detour into the academic world, which was fine, but wasn't really ultimately for me, and is in many ways equally as difficult as performing arts. But the thing that I understand the best is music. I mean, it's the way that I can fully express myself, and the thing that holds my interest the longest. When it's so deeply in your craw, you know, it's you can veer away from it for a while, but always kind of come back to it.
So, what do you like the best about being a professional musician?
The thing that I find the most rewarding is the collaboration with other musicians. I mean, that when it's right and when it really clicks, when you have a particular idea and a particular song and you want to express it, but you need these other musicians to help make that a reality. And when it really syncs and you're really in the moment, there's nothing quite like it. It's very intimate. It's you're creating something that's much bigger than yourself. And I've been incredibly fortunate that in Toronto there are some really wonderful musicians, and most of whom on this record I've worked with before. And there's a real simpatico, and the playing off of each other. You know, it's never, even though, you know, I'm the quote unquote leader, I never think of it like that. It's truly a working together, and I listen to them, they listen to me. So I would say that's the thing that I find, you know, the greatest part of it.
Right on. What was one of the first live jazz shows you ever saw that really inspired you?
It's not the first one, but it's the one that probably had the greatest impact on me. This was about 23 years ago, I'm going to say, at the Village Vanguard in New York City, and it was Shirley Horn. And it was just her. She didn't have her trio with her. And obviously it's, you know, one of, if not the most venerated jazz club perhaps in the world. And the lights weren't right, and she was late to the stage, and all this other stuff was going on. And she came out, and she only did about 5 songs. It was a pretty short set. and she did A Time for Love. She started it on piano, and the entire room, I mean, you could hear a pin drop. It was mesmerizing. She had the audience in the palm of her hand. And she wasn't performing to the audience, you know, she was letting us into her world. And it was magic. I mean, it was, you knew that you were really in the presence of a singular artist. And the time that she took was remarkable, because any musician will tell you, particularly singers, leaving space is often can be kind of tricky, because the natural inclination is to keep going. But I think it was Miles Davis who said, you know, what you don't play is as important as what you do play. And she was kind of a protege of his. And the space she left, which allowed the audience to want more and to hold on to everything, every word she said and every note she played. That was a pretty remarkable performance, I have to say.
Let me ask you this about what's going on in our world right now. When the music does come back, what are you hoping the audience gets from this, and even you and musicians, that is new and revelatory when everything gets back to where it was before?
Well, I would like to think, and this is speaking specifically of music that involves vocals, and I may not make a lot of friends by this comment, but I think there has been a real, I mean, there are always exceptions to this, but there can be a certain tendency for gimmick, I think, particularly in the vocal world. A lot of Soundalikes, even particularly in the world of jazz, it's somehow, if you don't improvise and scat up a storm, you're not doing enough. And I think that, frankly, there are very few singers who can really do scat singing particularly well. And I would like to see a return to a kind of a true artistry that isn't about a sound-alike or a lot of gimmick or a lot of gesture or a lot of, you know, gymnastics, kind of getting back to something maybe a little bit truer and a little bit less about the entertainment quality of it, if that makes any sense. You know, yeah. we live in a world where, I mean, there's a generation of, and again, I'm speaking primarily of singers who don't understand the idea that auto-tune is a mechanical process. The human voice cannot reproduce that. Or who cannot sing a vocal line straight through without decorating the notes, you know? I've seen it with my own eyes. And I'm just, because I'm not 25, I come from a slightly different world where you learn how to sing properly and communicate and have proper diction and things like that. The way that instrumentalists are singers, you know, there's a certain technique. But with the internet and GarageBand and all this stuff, it's like, you know, everybody thinks they can be a musician in a basement with 3 chords on a guitar, and that's not always the case. So it would be nice to see a kind of return to an appreciation for the craft a little bit.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
I probably sound a bit elitist, but yeah.
No,
and maybe
no, it's
perhaps
good.
Maybe perhaps with all the live streaming concerts of, you know, even really heralded musicians who do not have their full backup bands playing in their kitchen, which is kind of great. I mean, you'll hear Sean Colvin playing guitar in her living room in Austin, Texas, without her band and all this. And, you know, people get to experience what really great craftsmanship is, you know, without all the bells and whistles. So maybe that will help that along to get back to something a little more basic.
Yeah. Yeah. So everything's going to come down to this. Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, and your fans. But you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
I always loved, Sarah Vaughan had this comment. She apparently did not love to be characterized as a jazz singer. And she said something to the effect of that she liked to be thought of as a good singer of good material in good taste. And that's sort of where I kind of like to think of myself. It's not about bells and whistles. It's about, for the most part, people who might enjoy my work are going to primarily come to hear the quality of the voice and the choice of material. So hopefully I'm a pretty good singer who has pretty good taste in material. That's who has something to say and kind of wears my heart on my sleeve in terms of the material that I choose to perform. It's really nothing more than that in a way. If you want, Wayne Newton, then you can go to Las Vegas, but it's about a simplicity, and that really it is more than me. I put the song much higher than myself, and I'm doing the best I can to interpret it and bring it to life somehow.
Right on. That's a great answer, and I appreciate you taking some time out in these very extraordinary times in our human history to talk about music and everything in between. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it as well.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Toronto, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Peter for his time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
The endless stars.
Neon Jazz.